Hey YouTube, how's it going? Welcome back to another mini guide. Today we're going to be going over actions and functions, what they're used for, and all that jazz. It's a less visual version, I guess, if we were to hit play here, but basically we're going to come up with a bunch of scenarios and ways you would use actions and functions to help improve your code flow. So if that sounds interesting, check it out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to head on over to our scenes here. We're going to create a nice new scene called Action Func or Function. Hit enter, we're going to enter there. We can remove the light, it's more just like a coding demo. Create a nice new transform and reset that guy. And we'll create our code object just like we do for every mini guide. Beautiful. Okay, so today's, like I said, it's very just more code oriented. You could do this in a console app if you really wanted to, but because majority of our stuff is regarding around Unity, we're gonna do it in Unity for people. So we're gonna create a new class. We're gonna call it Action Func. We'll open that guy up. Beautiful. And we don't really need the update function, but we will use the start. And for this tutorial, I'm just gonna kind of put everything that we need to use in one file. I'm also going to be using some sample classes that are not inheriting from mono behavior. You are welcome to use actions and functions outside of just regular C# classes, like if they inherit from mono behavior, that's up to you. It's just much more easier for the demo that I don't. Okay, so I'm throwing around action functions and what are those? So the first one we're going to be going over is an action. This is essentially a function that you're going to call that's been set into a variable. So this is very good if, let's say you had a login screen and this login screen had a button that said login. And maybe you want that action to link up to some other code that's not in that class. Or another scenario is that same login screen is used in a different area of the game and doesn't take you to the same spot the previous version did. An action would come in handy where you can have an action for the button, and in that case set it for version 1 of the view and version 2 of the view, and you can utilize the same prefabs while being able to dynamically change the code, which is kind of cool. So we're not going to go in that heavy of a detail, but that's a very good use case, is where you have a screen that might be used multiple times throughout your game, and there's buttons and stuff in there, and they link to different areas, and it's much more easier to set this variable than it is to kind of like go make two versions of the same screen, essentially. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up another class right underneath this first one here. We're going to say public class sample action. Beautiful. So this is where we're going to store our actions for the sample. And we're going to have a nice function here called public void run sample. So the idea is we're going to set up a bunch of scenarios, and then we're going to run through them. And it added the curly braces for us, so let's remove those. Don't need extra ones. And the idea is that we're going to run through the sample, and you're going to get a bunch of outputs like you saw at the start of the video. Okay, so there's a couple ways that you can utilize actions here. So we're going to make this one a public action, and you'll notice that it is inside of system. So if you don't have the namespace using system, it will appear, if I remove this really quickly, it will appear red, and in that case you need to bring in system. Okay, and that's just like a very like Microsoft.NET namespace that you can use. So like I said, you can use this in console apps, WFP, that like anything like literally C#, and you're pretty good. So action has a couple of versions. It has a void version. Basically, you're not passing anything into this. So assume this is a function, right? where when I click this button, I'm going to call this function, and this function's stored in a variable. Sometimes it's a void, doesn't have any parameters, and sometimes it has multiple parameters. Okay, so the first sample we're going to do is one with no parameters. So we're going to call this void action, right? Just not that the return type is void, it's just that we're not passing anything into the parameter. The second one we're going to do is a float, and you'll notice here we're using the less than greater than to denote that it is generic. Okay, so that actually means that if I just open this up and we get some IntelliSys here, it takes inversion t, and you'll see it goes all the way up to 16 parameters you can hold into it, which is a ton. I don't think I've gone any more than 4 probably. But basically you can throw a variety of types in here. So you could throw int, a float, a bool. Oh, let's throw another version of the sample action in there. Like, you can throw a variety of stuff in there. In this case, we're just gonna have a float, and we're gonna call this variable action. Beautiful. And then a last part of our sample, which I'll explain a little bit more as we get down to it. I'm going to call this it's just going to be a void action, and I'm going to call it a multi-action. Beautiful. Okay, so to call these, there's 2 ways that you can really call these. You can call them anywhere in your code. Because it's in my class here, I can call it like a standard function like this, or I can call it like this. This is totally up to you which kind of method you really use. I used to like doing the .invoke, and that was to tell me that it was an action, so when I was reading through the code, but I've more recently just adopted just calling it like a function here. So that's up to you, which one you want to use. We're going to say variable action. Let's just pass in a random number. We're going to say 2. And then we're going to call our multi-action. Okay, so our sample class is set up. We have a couple actions. When you run the sample, it's going to call these with how we set them. So let's go ahead and we'll go set these guys. So in our start function up here, we're going to say actions, and we're going to make a new sample action, which we need a variable for. So we're going to say private sample action. Sample action. And if you're using like straight up Unity where you have multiple mono behaviors, you could just do your standard like serialized field, private sample action, and then this is stored in its own mono behavior. It's in a different class, and you go and link them up like you normally would in the inspector. Works the same way. This is just much easier if it's all in one go. Okay, so let's create, because we're not doing a mono behavior, we have to create a new version of this class and initialize it. Okay, so we're going to dot into our void action. And there's a couple ways to set this, and there's a reason why I did the multi-action as well. So the first way is we're going to say the void action is equal to, and I'm going to make a void action, and it's gone red, and what we need to do is we need to replace it with a function. So for the ease of this case, I'm not going to use any like inline function stuff or arrow functions. I'm going to use actually just function definitions that we wrote down here. If you are familiar with arrow functions or inline functions, depending what language you come from, they're called various things, you're welcome to do that. So that could be something like this, for example. This would be an inline function in which I could do debug.log all la-di-da-di. And that's normally, in most cases, what you would end up doing. For this sample to kind of understand for new people that maybe doesn't really know inline functions or that sort of functionality, this is kind of a method, another way that you can attack it. And in most cases, depending on how much logic you have, this might be a better method. Okay, so let's just debug.log. We're going to be doing a lot of debug.log. I'm going to say calling our void action. Beautiful. And then we'll do our sample action. We'll say variable action, and that's going to be equal to a variable action function. And you'll notice that I'm doing all voids as the return type, is like what I was saying. But this one, because we've denoted it as a float, we got to do float in here. We'll call this a value. Let's go ahead and debug log that value. I'm going to use the $ here so I can put in value as an object without like messing around with my string. Say our number is this. Okay, cool. And the last one is the multi-action. And this is, in most cases, this is how you're going to write the syntax for actions. So in most cases, the cool thing about actions is that it doesn't always have to link up to one function. Maybe, just like a button, it has to call a bunch of things. Maybe it has to call audio. Maybe it has to change scenes. Maybe it has to do some other things. In that case, the action has a plus equals. And it's not. And what it's going to do is it's going to kind of like concatenate all the function calls it needs to together, so you can continue working. So we're going to say multi-action 1. We're going to do a private void multi-action 1 with a debug.log multi-action 1. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste, and we're going to write 2 there and 2 here. So we're going to have 2 functions. So when this action calls, I'm going to call two functions here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to copy this multi-action line, and I'm going to put 2. So if I was to put this as an equals, it would actually like replace this, but we're adding. We're saying, you know what, I want you to call 1 and 2. When you're using the plus equals, keep in mind you have to remove them as well. So in this sample, we're going to do it right here at the end. But as in generic good practice, that before you actually add them to it, you actually try and remove them first. Otherwise, you'll stack up multiple of the same function call. So keep that in mind when you're doing stuff. So we're going to say remove the signed actions / cleanup. And I'm just going to do it here knowing that I'm adding it once, removing it at the end. We're done. Like I said, in general practice, you'll put the minus equals before the plus just to be safe. And typically also for Unity specific stuff, you might have an on destroy that also has the minus versions as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're starting to use actions. If you find that you're like, hey, I only assigned this once, but it's calling twice, those are the kind of issues you might run into. Okay, so those are all set up. Let's go ahead and we'll go to sample action.run sample. Beautiful. Okay, so we'll go back to Unity, let it compile, go to code, add action func, and we're going to hit play, and we're going to say calling our void action number is 2, multi 1, multi 2, right? So it came in, set them up, ran the sample went void action, variable action, multi action. And you can even do this multiple times, right? Like if I call multi-action twice, we're gonna see all the 1, 2, 1, 2 again, right? All that jazz. So just like any function call, you can kind of call as many times as you want. And that's kind of the gist of just actions. Like they're super handy. Like I said, if you had a screen that needs to be used in multiple places, is a very good prime example for things you might want to use actions. I tend to use them for input systems. I have a fully dedicated system that captures inputs for player controllers, and then I'll have an action that says, on move, and then my player controller will be like, oh, I want to subscribe to the on move, which is a super handy way to use it. So functions. So functions are very similar to actions, but they're a way to kind of like declare a function. I try not to use the actual word when trying to describe it. But it'll declare a function, and so while all these basically had void returns, functions can have actual like returning value, whether it's an int, bool, class, whatever you want. Okay, so and these are super handy. Maybe you're trying to like have some debug testing, in which case you have like a debug version and non-debug version of a specific code. You can set the function when you know you're in debug to this value, like to this functionality, whereas in the runtime or the non-debug version is going to be this function. They come super handy. We tend to use them if you're debugging and you're trying to log into the login screen, for example. Maybe the functionality, like I was saying, is different when you have it in debug. Maybe you want to put some extra checks in there for the non-debug version, or maybe as a quick sample in the debug version, you don't even like have to accept a username or password. It just logs you in, so it's much faster to work with. A variety of things like that. So we're going to do a class, and we're going to call this class sample func. And we're going to say public void run sample, just like we did before. Beautiful. Okay, so there's no real void version of a func, otherwise it's basically just an action. And this is also in system as well. So as long as you have using namespace system for the actions, you'll have the funcs available as well. So we're going to create an int version first. And if I go back really quick here and I show you kind of the IntelliSys, the last parameter you add is the out. Okay, so where I have void here, that's your return type. The out is your return type. It's always the last parameter that you put into the func. So if you have to put at least one. If you put one in, that's your return type. If you put two in, it's one parameter in, one out. Okay. So we're going to say func int, and this is going to be called int func. So this is basically me just calling a function, and it's going to return to me an integer. We're going to have a public func. We're going to say int. A lot of ints, and we're going to basically make an add function. So we're going to pass in two integers, a and b, and then we're also going to return. The func is going to return to us another integer. Okay, so the cool thing about funcs is that basically I'm going to write the debug stuff in this class, whereas the actions were all handled in the other class. So that's another way to kind of understand between the difference between the two. One's kind of like, oh, this is kind of like in my class. The other one's not in my class, sort of thing. Okay, so we're going to call the int func. Okay, I'm not going to do any null checking right now, right? So a lot of this stuff I'm assuming has been set. If I didn't set a void action up here and I try to call it, you're going to get a null reference exception. Keep in mind that sometimes you might have to do a check, right? If I went void action not equal null, right? So just be careful of that. I'm not doing that in this tutorial. If you're not setting it properly and you're getting a null reference exception, you probably have it as null and you should do a null check. Same with the funcs. All right, so we're going to go debug log. Our $sign here, my value is value. Okay, and I'm going to copy this real quick, and we don't need to define define anymore because we have it defined. And we're going to say add func. And like I was saying before, because we have 3 in here, that's returning 1, which is the last one, and it requires a value 1 or 2. So we're going to just say 1 and 2. So the idea here is that this function should add 2 numbers. It's going to add 1 and 2. It should return to us 3. So we should see in there. Okay. Now let's go ahead and we'll set this up really quick. So after we run the actions, we're going to run the funcs. We're going to say sample func, which we don't have defined yet. It's going to be a sample func. Say sample func dot int func equal to an int func, and we'll make that in a second. Sample func dot add func is equal to add func, and then we'll run our sample. Beautiful. All right, so let's define these guys right here at the bottom. We're going to say private int func. It's going to return to us the number 10. So the first debug log should be the number 10. The second one, which is our add func, takes in 2 variables. So we'll say value 1, value 2. We're going to return value 1 plus value 2. Okay, very, very simple, like a functionality. And okay, everything should be set up. Let's go back to our Unity scene. Let's clear this log here. We'll hit play. And this is a good example where we got a null reference exception. Okay. And the null reference exception here is because we didn't do like the sample action and define what sample func is. So sample func is equal to new sample func. This is perfect. Null reference exceptions is mostly what most people get when they're programming, and as a little just be able to like look either what at the line is, and then just be like, oh, something's null, I probably didn't set it, right? Okay, so enough of that chit chat. Okay, so we're gonna hit play, and we're gonna go through. We have our actions, we have our void 10, right? Our value 10, which is here. And for our add function, we're adding 1 and 2, which is 3. And beautiful, it does some simple math there for us. And that's the idea behind funcs and actions, and hopefully you guys like that. Make sure you guys comment down below, give it a like, give it a share, and check out my other videos, and we'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, I just wanted to make sure that I give a nice shout out to all my Patreons over on Patreon. And they're going to be in the following list for you. Arthur Zhang, ARVR 2020, Timothy McCoon. Hey everyone, if you guys liked the video, make sure you guys click that subscribe button, give it a like, and make sure to comment. It really helps out. And if you guys are looking to support the project further, I also have my Patreon, which will be linked in the description down below. Thank you, and have a good day.